Hey, campfire crew, let's get it on. Planning to Rob Me by Eccentric Shaman. This happened to me in Tempe, Arizona, not far from Mill Ave where all the bars are. I was out bar hopping with a group of friends one weekend, having a good time, and had gotten pretty wasted. I had this terrible habit of wandering off and getting lost when I drank, and that particular night I had managed to get myself into a very dumb situation. After wandering down streets for almost an hour, I started to realize I was very lost, and to make things worse, my phone was out of battery. At some point I decided I would just walk back to my friend's house, which I knew was somewhere north of the area we were bar hopping. I should mention I am severely incompetent when it comes to directions and navigating in a city, so I didn't realize I was a solid 7 to 8 miles away from my friend's place. As I was stumbling confidently along the empty roads at 2 a.m., a sedan suddenly pulled off the road in front of me aggressively, almost blocking my path. Somewhat startled, I looked towards the driver's side and saw a rather large and mean-looking black man staring me down. In situations like that, most people have one of two reactions. They either become scared and defensive, or angry and aggressive. I, on the other hand, am an insane person and was just drunk enough to have no sense of the danger I was in. I should mention I'm your typical privileged suburban white boy, not particularly threatening or big. I proceeded to wave at the guy and said, "Hey man, what's good?" I'm not completely sure, but I think I was probably smiling too. I specifically remember the face he made. It was a sort of confused and conflicted look, as if I were asking him what year it was. He paused for a second and asked me something, but I couldn't understand what he said. So I said something like, "Huh?" And then he asked me, "Where are you going?" I told him I was trying to walk to my friend's place, but I had no idea where I was. And after another pause, he told me to get in. Without thinking, I walked over to the passenger side and hopped in. Pretty dumb, right? Well, at the time, it seemed like a good idea. Once I got in, I was able to get a better look at the guy. He was covered in tats and was wearing your typical thug attire. I also noticed his arm was all bandaged. Oh, and he had a pistol tucked into his shorts. And again, for some reason, none of that fazed me at the time. He asked me where my friend's place was, and I gave him directions. I'm pretty sociable and talkative when I drink, so I immediately started chatting with the guy casually. I don't remember exactly what we talked about, but eventually he started telling me that he had just gotten out of the hospital after being treated for a gunshot wound on his arm, and his girl had just broken up with him because of it. Apparently, she didn't like that he was in a gang and was always getting into gunfights. Go figure. He then told me that he was real pissed off about her and about getting shot, and he was driving around looking for someone to rob when he found me, and that he had served time for robbery in the past. At that point, my drunken brain started to connect the dots, and I thought about the roughly $200 I had in my wallet at that very moment. But instead of freaking out, I just said something like, "Damn man, that's rough." He also told me that he really wanted to be a rapper and was trying to get his music career started. I tried to be supportive and told him to go for it. About 10 or 15 minutes later, we pulled up at my friend's place. This is when I should have gotten out of the car and told the armed man thanks for the ride. But again, I'm an insane person and felt like I owed him one for taking me all the way there. So I asked if he wanted to come in and smoke some weed. He said he was down. At this point, my friends had already been back for a while and were all wondering what had happened to me. As you might expect, they were awfully surprised when I showed up with a strange black dude who I now knew was a gang member and who had debated robbing me at gunpoint. What the dude did next, though, sort of sketched everyone out. My buddy lives in a house with a few other people. His room is at the end of a hallway, and that's where they were all listening to music. He also had a huge safe in his closet that was visible as soon as you walked in the room. I didn't realize it, but my new friend had brought his gun inside with him, and shortly after entering the room, after everyone said, "What's up?" he took the gun out of his waistband and put it down right on top of the safe in front of everyone. It seemed like a really odd thing to do, but it was a lot better than what he could have done. I feel like it was sort of a show of respect, like he wanted to show that he wasn't going to use it. Luckily, I have super chill friends, so they acted cool and were about to roll up a blunt. And a few minutes later, we all went out back to smoke, leaving the gun in the room. The dude chilled with us for a while longer and actually seemed to get along with some of my friends who had a similar interest in music. Then he picked up his gun off the safe and left without incident. Looking back, I realized that could have gone much, much worse, especially since my buddy had a lot of cash in that safe, and he could have easily robbed us at gunpoint at any time. I like to think that although he was a criminal and a gang member, he was also just a guy going through a hard time, and a little kindness and marijuana prevented that night from going very bad. Or am I just crazy? Obsessed Neighbor by Alana Has No Life. This happened from 2020 to January 2022. Over the course of that time, I lived in this apartment. I'm a 21-year-old female at the time, and my husband, but then boyfriend, was 22-year-old male. We moved into our downstairs apartment, and we loved it. It was our first place that wasn't a dorm, and we didn't have roommates. When we first moved in, we only had one cat, but over time we ended up with 2 cats and a dog. The way the apartment was set up was duplex style, so each building only had 4 apartments, 2 on the bottom and 2 on the top. We always had the bottom right apartment, and behind us was a cemetery. We would always joke that at least our neighbors were quiet. Well, we were wrong. The first time our upstairs neighbor had an issue, he stood outside of his apartment and slammed his door open and closed for 10 minutes. I couldn't figure out what we had done wrong. Did we close our door too loudly? He wouldn't communicate with us over what the issue was, but anytime we did something wrong in his mind, he would slam his door open and closed for 10 minutes, shaking the whole apartment. The night before I was flying out for our wedding, we spent the whole day at work, and then we went to a diner for a late-night meal, just trying to have a nice night as our last night together as fiancés. We came home and I was having an anxiety attack about if I had packed everything. My fiancé was at the passenger side door trying to talk me through my anxiety attack, when our neighbor came flying down the stairs yelling at us. Something about how we made noise all day, and he couldn't believe that we were so inconsiderate. My fiancé yelled at him to fuck off as he was trying to protect me. And once we got inside, my fiancé went upstairs to talk to him, and we figured out it was our cat tree, and that every time our cat jumped on it, it hit the wall. Okay, easy enough, we just moved the cat tree from the wall. Or so we thought it would be that easy. We returned from our honeymoon. We thought everything was good. My husband tried to befriend the neighbor as they both played online games, and my husband asked if instead of slamming the door, could he message us in Discord when he had an issue. The guy agreed, but that didn't happen. I decided to call the apartment complex to let them know what was going on, and they were understanding and said, okay, let's reach out to the property managers who were in the other upstairs apartment. The husband of the property manager team basically told us that we were making everything up, because he would know if his neighbor was slamming the door for 10 minutes straight. He told us to stop making waves. It was now the end of 2021, and I had spent my time in that apartment in fear every single day. Rent was dirt cheap, like $600 for a one-bedroom, so we were going to tough it out. My husband got told that he had gotten a promotion and that we were going to be moving to the East Coast. We were so excited. So as he left, I finished up packing up the apartment. I tried to be the perfect neighbor now that my husband had left. I used my earphones for everything and anything. I closed stuff very slowly. I didn't want to make any waves. It was a week before I started the drive across the country, and my friend and my people from my husband's work were helping load up our U-Haul box for the day. After that, my friend and I decided to go in town for the rest of the day since my apartment was empty besides a bed on the ground. I dropped her off at her house and then got home at 6. I decided to put in my earphones and vacuum. After I vacuumed, I took out the trash and locked the front door as I was just going to lie down and watch TikToks. My husband was always on my case because I would often forget to lock the front door. I lay down with my earphones in and was watching TikTok for maybe 20 minutes when I heard someone at my front door pounding on it. And I knew that voice. It was my upstairs neighbor. My dog was trying to crawl into my skin, and meanwhile my male cat was at the window hissing at this guy. He was pounding on my windows now and yelling that he was going to kill me. I called my mom, who was 4 states away. She told me to call 911 and not her. I was texting my husband and another friend, and I was whispering to 911 that my upstairs neighbor was at my door threatening me. Then I heard him trying to open my front door. We lived in a small town, and the cops got there very quickly. They took him away, and I was left in my living room with 2 cops. I couldn't speak. I just kept asking if he was gone, and they assured me that he would be in jail for the night. My friend, who lived an hour away, had loaded up her husband in the car and drove to my apartment to get me. I spent the night at her house, and my mom finally arrived the next day, and I called the apartment complex again to tell them what happened. They finally believed me, and they had no choice. I sent them the police report. My mom and I started the drive to the East Coast very early, as I wanted to close that chapter, and I wasn't sleeping with the nightmares. We were in the middle of the Midwest when someone from the hospital that this guy had been committed to called me to tell me that they were releasing him, but I needed to call the cops for an order of protection because he was still threatening my life. I said I was halfway across the country, so he couldn't get me then. And they said that was for the best, given this hatred he had towards me. We never found out what was the final straw. Was it me vacuuming at 6 p.m.? But I never not lock my front door now. I couldn't be left alone for months. I was constantly checking to see if he had found where we had moved to. In 2023, we came to a plea agreement since he had moved home to his parents in Alaska, and that if he got mental health help, I would drop the charges. We now have a pit bull who is being trained to guard me at night so I can sleep. And yep, I always lock the front door whenever I go into my apartment. No Wonder You're Still Single by Winked. So I started texting someone I met on a dating app. They made the conversation super 18 plus as soon as we moved to text. I wasn't playing into it as I was currently at a family Christmas party, and it was about 2 in the afternoon. He got upset and asked if his magic wand wasn't good enough. Then he sent more and more photos trying to get me to reply. But since I was at a family event that he also knew I was at, I didn't find the best time or place to look at any texts from him. Before I stopped opening his messages, he felt the need to ask me if his photos made me wet. When I told him that I wasn't even thinking or looking at them because I was with family and currently holding a 5-month-old nephew, he replied with, "So? You could still be wet." I'm sorry, what? When I got home, I decided to take a bath because the day I had was rough. He was now blowing up my phone, wondering where I went, and if I was finally home yet. Mind you, I told him I was busy and might not reply until later that night. I'd known this man for 5 hours at that point. He asked me what I was thinking about after I got home. It was around 9 p.m., and I told him sleep, to be honest. He didn't like the reply I gave him and asked me why I wasn't thinking about the photos that he had sent me and how I couldn't go back and look at them. This dude was nothing but provocative with me, and I turned it down many times, telling him I was upset due to a recent breakup and not looking for hookups. He didn't take no for an answer. He kept spamming my phone and calling me even when I told him that I was heading to bed. I was drinking the same night to unwind from the long day that I'd spent with family, but he woke me up, questioning me as to why I wasn't talking to him, because he wanted to talk to me. So shouldn't I be there to talk to him? I told him I was sleeping and didn't want to talk. And this man asked me, well, aren't you drunk? Shouldn't you be in the mood? Like, really? I ended up hanging up on him and ignoring any messages from him until the morning. And I didn't reply until later in the afternoon. By that time, another gentleman I had met a few weeks before asked me on a date. I, of course, said yes and had a great time. Said date and I drank at his place and played some. It got late and we were pretty tipsy from the shots, so I just stayed at his place for the night as I didn't want to drive. The other dude ended up calling me at 3 a.m. while I was lying next to my date. I picked up the phone in a half-asleep daze and said hello. He had called to tell me that he was at my apartment complex and wanted me to let him in so we could congregate. Being confused as to how he knew where I lived, I woke up very quickly. I asked him how he knew where my place was, and he proceeded to tell me Facebook and some of my family's pages that I was tagged in. I assumed that he saw my mom's post when I moved in 2 years ago with the apartment sign in the background of the photo. Mind you, I never told this man my last name. Freaking out, I woke up my date and let him know what was going on. He took me back to my house, but we didn't go to my door. We looked around and I ended up asking the other guy what he was driving. We found the car he was in and drove by slowly, and I took down the plates. I called the local sheriff's office and let them know what was going on so they could send an officer out there to ask this person to leave the property. Once he was gone, my date waited inside with me for an hour to be sure the guy didn't come back. We then headed back to my date's house and proceeded to sleep for the remainder of the night. But sadly, it didn't end there. I woke up to a few more texts from a new number I hadn't saved, as his was blocked. It was him again, asking why I didn't give him a chance, telling me that I was perfect but I let my emotions get in the way of what we could have had, telling me how I'd better not lose my chance at being with someone like him. He thought his 9-inch magic wand was God's gift to Earth, and if I didn't take this opportunity now, I'd live the rest of my life wondering what real magic felt like. I had no words for this guy. I was stunned. How did someone I didn't even know 24 hours before this turn into what it did? I was really creeped out, and I told him more than once to leave me alone and that I was with someone. He asked me why I picked a stranger over him, as if he wasn't also a stranger just the day before, not even a full day ago. The dude had said he was sorry after I'd snapped at him around 10:30 p.m. That was a bit before he showed up at my apartment building. He said he was sorry and told me that it was wrong of him to act that way, but then he still proceeded to continue to act the way he did? Oh, his last text to me was, "No wonder you're still single." Yeah, man, no wonder I'm still single. The Fireman's Widow by Zebaram. I was 18 years old when this happened, and I'm 32 now. I worked as an assistant at a fire department. One night, a woman called saying that she was the widow of a deceased fireman and was looking for someone to fix her grandson's computer, as he lived with her. By that time, I had already completed some IT courses and was used to receiving calls from family and friends to do tasks just like that. So I took her number and told her I would call her back later. I asked a sergeant about her and mentioned the name of her deceased husband, and he confirmed that she was who she said she was, and that they were familiar with her calls for help like this. So I called her back and told her that I could help. I quoted her a price for the job, and she agreed, and we scheduled a day to get it done. On that day, I gathered the necessary equipment and went to the address she gave me. It was in the city center, which in my city means old residential buildings, as nearly all buildings there are now commercial offices. When I arrived, it really was an old building, and the bell wasn't working, as a man exited the building and told me. So I waited around 30 to 40 minutes for her to answer the phone and let me in. She lived on the 5th floor, and there was no elevator, so obviously I took the stairs. When I finally reached her floor, she opened the door quickly and let me inside. As soon as I looked around, I couldn't have been more disgusted. The apartment was filthy, and the smell was unbearable. I know this might sound like I'm judging her for her lower status, but since she is the widow of a fireman, she received a pension that was enough to take care of herself and her grandson. But there were cockroaches everywhere, and I had to hold myself back from vomiting. She guided me to the computer, and as we passed the bathroom door, I noticed the bathtub looked like it had never been cleaned. Once I started working on the computer, she kept talking about how lonely she was and how handsome I was. She offered me food and drink several times, which I obviously declined. Then her grandson came into the room. He looked about 7 or 8 years old, but spoke like a baby. She kept telling him how nice I was and that I was going to fix the computer. The boy asked her for a cup of milk, and she went to prepare it, and during the entire time she was in the kitchen, the boy just stared at me. I tried talking to him a few times, but he didn't respond, and I felt like I was in a horror movie, and I could be the victim of a murderer at any moment. I'm not sure why. I just didn't feel safe there. Well, she came back with milk for the boy, and I noticed she was holding a knife in the other hand. Then she said she was preparing lunch and went back to the kitchen. At that point, I was sure something was going to happen to me, so I quickly finished the job and called her into the room. She came in, still holding the knife, and I told her I was finished and I was leaving. She insisted that her grandson needed to test it first, and since she was still holding the knife, I agreed. The boy tested the computer and told her that it was faster now. But at that moment, she turned to me and said she didn't have the money with her. I just told her it didn't matter and that I could come back later to collect the payment. She finally let me leave, and I almost ran to the exit. Never been that scared in my life. Dangerous Cities in Denmark by Agreeable Parsley. Back in early 2022, just after New Year's, my family was visiting a family who were friends of ours. I'd heard some bad things about the city they lived in, but I never thought much of stuff like that because I'd never really experienced anything dangerous, and their street was safe. I got along well with the eldest son of the family. We'd known each other since we were little, and we were having some fun. I was a bit more degenerate and experimental back then, and young, so he talked me into sucking deodorant. It's stupid and dangerous, and the high only lasts a few seconds. For those unfamiliar, you put some fabric over a deodorant spray as a filter and suck the gas through it. I still have the sensation burned into my memory. Wet fabric tasting slightly like soap and chemicals, and stinging my tongue and lips a bit. We'd gone through a can or two and wanted to try some more and get some snacks, but it was late, so we had to go to a petrol station. We went outside and told our parents we were going for a walk. I put on my new winter coat, which was fluffy and fully reflective. The outside was purely a bright reflective material, the exact opposite of camouflage. We got to the petrol station all right and both noticed this weird red car outside the station as we entered, but I personally didn't think that much of it. I'd always found it was best not to show any fear and act completely unbothered to keep weird people from noticing you. It's kind of a mental game. We went in, and they didn't have any deodorant, which we suspected before going. But it was our only option, and we thought it'd be fun to go for a walk anyway. My friend still wanted something to eat, so we got some warm food. But before that, he pointed out that the car we saw was now right outside the entrance and exit of the petrol station kiosk, and that there were multiple sketchy guys sitting in it. I started getting anxious now and mentally prepared myself, but kept my composure. They were there for way too long to be doing anything normal. They were waiting for us. We got ready to leave. We only had one option: walk past them and fast. We didn't know if they noticed us looking at them, but they likely did. We exited, and my friend walked much faster than me and passed them. But as I passed them, they told me that there was a guy in the car who knew my friend, and he wanted to say hi. I played along and said, "Hey, he says he knows you." Part of me actually bought into it, to be honest. Maybe that part of me that was trying to cope with the situation. But I found that playing along and acting normally when people trying to trick you usually exposes their deception. For example, my friend reacted perfectly. He acknowledged what I said, turned around slightly while walking, waved to the car while saying hi, and then continued walking, which made it hard for them to have any excuse to not let us keep going. There was no need to get right close to us just to say hi. As soon as they realized we weren't going to walk up to their car, they started it and left. They must have seen us coming because they drove out of the petrol station, turned left, and then drove down the road we came from and blocked the entrance to the path we came. This put a chill down my spine as it confirmed the only reason they were there was for us, but also that they weren't done. They lingered for a bit, but maybe they realized we wouldn't be stupid enough to walk into their trap, so they slowly drove a bit further down the road. But we weren't stupid enough to fall for that trap either. I did slightly hope they had given up and realized their plan was stupid, because I thought that if I were a criminal, I wouldn't do things how they did. But I didn't really even know what their intentions were. Were they going to rob us from their car? That seemed like a self-limiting method to me. But I didn't dare think they'd kidnap us or anything like that. I didn't see why they'd want to target us for both of those things. Murder for fun? I don't know. My friend told me that as soon as they were out of sight, we would run to the left along some buildings. It was his town, and he knew his way around. It's kind of hard to describe the layout, but the road that leads to the path we came from swang to the left, behind some buildings, and we were on the opposite side of those buildings and could use them as cover. At that point, I thought, shit, my coat is the most reflective piece of clothing in the world, and it's not exactly the best thing in that situation, to say the least. So I took it off and tied the sleeves around my waist with the inside facing out, which was black, to be more stealthy. But parts of the outside of the coat were still visible. Our adrenaline kicked in and we ran for a while along those houses. You could say that we did get high, just not off the deodorant. It was absolutely nerve-wracking not knowing what they wanted or where they were, and I imagined them being around any and every corner. Eventually, we reached the end of the row of houses, which wasn't too far, but felt like miles. There were two main roads that crossed there, and I felt fairly confident that the men didn't know where we were. I mean, who knows how many were in that car? My friend pointed to a little path which ran along the right side of the road, which was to our right. I could taste safety again. The path was a lot lower than the road, and there was a slope connecting the side of the road to the side of the path with some bushes on it. I mean, it felt safe. At the end of the path, there was a tunnel, and that tunnel, though it was dirty and dark, seemed more appealing than it ever could otherwise at that moment. To me, it represented safety. We started walking and talking more casually, but we're still a little cautious. My friend told me that when he went through the tunnel, we'd come to his street, and then we'd just have to walk the distance back to his house. But as we were halfway along the path, we saw headlights approaching on the road, which was to the left and above us. Out of reflex, I crouched down and leaned onto the steep slope, which had damp grass on it, and hid behind the bushes as my friend did the same. I honestly thought this was just a random car and that we were being overcautious, but I'm glad that we did it, because the car drove suspiciously slowly, and it felt like ages before it finally passed us. In hindsight, what other car would even be out there at that time of night? Anyway, it ended up turning left down the road we came from. It was them, probably completing their circle and going back to the petrol station to find some new victims. I mean, imagine what losers you have to be to spend your time waiting at a station for possible victims. Whether they saw us or not, I don't know, but they had no chance of getting to us. We started sprinting again towards the tunnel, and it was a short journey through it, and we were finally on a street. Relief. And we slowed down again and started walking. You'd think this was the end of it, and so did we. But as we had gotten a bit down the street, which went down a big hill and led out of town, we heard a loud bang, like a gunshot, and we started sprinting once again, another adrenaline high. It wasn't right near us, but it sounded like it came from the petrol station we had come from, or at least that direction, which wasn't that far away. I think anything would have made us run at that point, though. Even the sound of a sweet old lady offering us cookies. That would have been a bit creepy in that context too, though. We reached his house, went up to his room, and agreed to not tell anybody about it. We debated whether the bang we heard was a gunshot or not. I mean, it was New Year, so it's not unlikely that it could have been a firework. But the weird thing is that we only heard that single bang the whole time. I'd never heard a gunshot before, so I didn't have any reference, but I still remember thinking it was a bit too loud to be a firework. That remains the most dangerous experience I've ever had, which I feel quite privileged about because I wouldn't say it's the worst experience to have had of the sort. But I do know it could have been a lot worse than it ended up being. Wildest Experience in the Coromandel in New Zealand by Shaddy Shaker. This happened nearly 6 years ago when my partner and I first got together. We decided to go camping by the beach in Coro. It's very remote, nothing for ages down the road. We were sitting on the rocky beach and he started telling me about a conversation he had had with one of his mates. His mate was chatting about seeing some weird lights in the sky, and partway into their conversation, they both saw the lights in the sky above them. Not even 5 minutes later, it started. I know this sounds far-fetched, but we'd spent almost 6 years trying to figure it out. We're both in scientific careers, and we are evidence-based people. If we hadn't experienced it at the same time, I don't think we would have believed it. There were 2 strikes of lightning, no thunder, then lights in the sky slowly aiming towards us. What looked like a Coast Guard searchlight started scanning across the forest around us, then stopped directly on us. And this was a small bay. There were no nearby boats before this started. As the light turned off, we saw that there was no boat, no lighthouse, nothing that could have created those lights. I mean, they lit up the entire mountainside. It definitely wasn't a torch. Then, peculiar strings of lights weaved around the trees. And here's the thing. I saw them as an off-white color. My man saw them as multicolored, and he's completely colorblind. They were far too fluid to be drones. The trees were very close together. Then, these weird beams that looked like flashlights but didn't quite look right started signaling all around us in the sky, waving over to us, then back to the sky. We were surrounded by dead branches, etc., yet we heard no footsteps. Each time we turned off the car lights, they turned on that millisecond, too quick for a normal reaction time. They became closer and closer, every time we turned the car headlights off and on, silently, until my partner quietly told me to get into the car right then. He heard laughter right beside him, but still no footsteps and no visible people. As we drove out, we saw a massive rubbish bag, about 2 meters long, stuffed full, and we had checked the site before putting our tent up, and it was definitely not there then. I work in the bush out in the Waps, and I know how to safely establish a tent site. We heard no plastic rustling either that would explain it being moved there. I mean, we were sober, straight, and of sound mental health. To this day, we have no idea what that was. I've scoured the internet, local libraries, etc., but I've found nothing to explain what we saw. Hey gang, thanks for listening to this episode of Uncle Josh's True Scary Stories. If you have a true scary story of any nature that you'd like to hear narrated on this channel, email it to unclejosh.truescarystories@gmail.com. I read them all. If you like what you heard, please give this video a thumbs up, consider subscribing, and tell your friends. Also, if you have a minute, leave a comment and let me know if you enjoyed the stories, or what you'd like to hear more of. Follow me on social media, and of course if you'd like to take your support of the channel a step further, find a link to my Patreon page in the description, and consider purchasing some Campfire Crew and Uncle Josh merchandise. Everybody, Happy New Year to you wherever you are. I hope 2025 is going to be a great one for each and every one of you. Be excellent to each other. And until next time, be wary of things that go bump in the night. It could be anything. A ghost, a monster, or the guy next door.